share one more illustration of why shaping influences are important. I have said often that in my counseling experience, I find that it's not unusual for a couple to be married 30 or 35 plus years and get a divorce, and some people would be surprised by that. How could that possibly happen? They have lived so long, for long together, and they seem to be doing so well. Well, from my perspective and from my chair within the counseling room, after so many years, I can easily see why a couple would get divorced after 30 or 35 years and think nothing about it. I want to explain that through this illustration of dating, from dating to divorce. And so a young couple, they meet. Boy meets girl, and what we do is we call this the dating season. Now, I have another name for this. I call this the artificial season. It's that artificial season where two people fake each other out until they get married. And it is true in a sense, and I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but there's also a reality to it, because you know that when you date, you're going to put your best foot forward. It's also not a 24/7 relationship, because you reboot every day. The girl goes to her home, you go to your home, and you start over again the next day. And so you're not living in a 24/7 construct. It's not two sinners in a box as far as being in a home. You can get a break from each other. And so the dating relationship can be quite fabulous, but also there's an artificiality to it. That's why I call it the artificial season. And so the boy meets the girl, and the boy asks the girl to marry him. She says yes, and so now they are hitched. They are a couple. They are one flesh, and they pull out of the station. Now, it is important that in the first 5 years of their marriage that they do a lot of work to work through whatever issues they have, because if they don't, their life is going to pick up speed. Now, these numbers of 5 years, for example, are arbitrary numbers, but there is a blessedness to the early stages of marriage, and if you're not careful, you can overlook some things, and then when your life does pick up speed, and you become busy with your life, like for the man, generally speaking, let's say that he goes off into the workplace for the next 40 years, and now he is distracted with his work somewhat, and let's say the wife, she may go off to her work, and then eventually she may have children. She may stay in the workplace and be bivocational as a mom and a person who works in vocationally. Or she can come home and be a stay-at-home mom. But either way, they're living somewhat separate lives, because they're working together to survive, but they're working in specific spheres that do not necessarily intersect. And so they can, kind of like their dating years, be distracted somewhat from each other. And this can go on for 5 to 20 years, especially if children come along and keep them busy with work and everything else that's going on. And it could be that there are some things that they do not particularly care about with each other that they can somewhat avoid, because they're distracted during this frenetic, busy time of their lives. And then as their children grow older and begin the growing into independence as teenagers, and eventually move out of the home, and then there's an empty nesting phase in their life, and let's call that arbitrarily the 20 plus years time. Then they come back together where they're less distracted. Maybe the husband retires and the wife doesn't have children, and so they're spending a lot of time together. And now they've been married, let's say 30 or 35 years, and they choose to get a divorce. And this is the part that flummoxes a lot of people. But when I look at this illustration that I'm drawing out for you, there is something that is missing, and it is actually the most vital part of this graph. You see, before they ever met each other, here's Mabel rolling into the station, and she's going to meet Biff at that dating stage. Well, before they ever met each other, they had a lot of baggage. Mabel had her baggage, and Biff had his baggage, and this is their former manner of life. These are the unique and varied things that shaped them into the individuals that they were before they ever met. And what they tend to do is they set their baggage aside during the dating season as much as they can keep it hidden from each other, which is why I call it the artificial season. But then when they move into the marriage construct, where there is no reboot every day, they're living in a 24/7 unbroken relationship. They cannot hide these shaping influences, the human motivations, the things that make them who they are. And that's why it's critical in those first 5 years that they really work on coming together as one flesh, because what can happen, as I've illustrated here, they can continue to roll out of the station and they can get into that distracting phase of work and children, and they can set those things aside. They can somewhat ignore the things that they dislike about each other, but it will come back to roost sometime in the future when they are less distracted, and it can be an easy temptation to divorce. That's why this webinar is so critical: human motivation and shaping influences. All right, so let's get into the